Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. Wendy Adekunle's life was just beginning to take shape at 23. She had a promising job in Oguta City and dreams of one day traveling the world. She was known for her warmth and determination, traits that drew people to her. Yet beneath her composed exterior lay a deep craving for connection. It was during this period that she met Gerald Brown, a young man who had ambitions of becoming a successful musician. Their first encounter was at a small lounge in Lakeside District, where local artists often performed. Wendy had been out with friends when Gerald's voice caught her attention. His lyrics were raw and heartfelt, painting vivid stories of hope and struggle. Though his performance earned modest applause from the crowd, something about his presence intrigued Wendy. He wasn't like the other musicians trying to imitate big stars. He had a spark of authenticity that she couldn't ignore. After his set, Wendy approached him to compliment his performance. Gerald was visibly surprised but appreciative. They talked for hours that night, exchanging stories about their dreams and fears. Gerald confided in her about his struggles, how he had been rejected by several record labels and was barely making ends meet. He admitted that his family in Riverstone Village didn't support his dreams, urging him instead to find a real job. Wendy admired his passion and resilience. Despite his circumstances, he remained hopeful about his future. Over the next few weeks, Wendy and Gerald became inseparable. He would invite her to his rehearsals, and she would offer feedback on his music. In turn, he became her confidant, listening to her frustrations at work and encouraging her to keep pushing toward her goals. Their connection deepened with each passing day, and soon they were officially a couple. Wendy's friends were skeptical of the relationship. "You're dating a broke musician?" One of them, Brenda, questioned over lunch one afternoon. "How do you know he won't just use you and leave once he makes it?" "Gerald isn't like that," Wendy defended. "He has a vision. He's not just chasing fame, he wants to make music that matters." Her friends exchanged doubtful glances but chose not to press the issue. However, her parents were far less subtle. During a family dinner, her father, Chief Adekunle, raised the topic with blunt concern. "Wendy, you're a young woman with a bright future. Why tie yourself to someone who can't even support himself?" "Dad, Gerald isn't just anyone," Wendy replied, frustration lacing her voice. "He has potential. He just needs time and support." Her mother sighed. "Potential doesn't pay bills, dear. We just don't want you wasting your best years on someone who may never succeed." Wendy left that dinner feeling torn. She respected her parents' opinions, but couldn't shake her belief in Gerald. He wasn't perfect, but he was determined. She saw in him the same drive she had within herself, the refusal to give up, no matter how hard things got. Over time, her visits to his apartment in the downtrodden Egba Heights neighborhood became a regular part of her routine. His living conditions were far from ideal. A one-room flat with peeling walls, a broken fan that barely worked, and a mattress on the floor. Yet Wendy never complained. She would bring him groceries and even lend him money when he was short on rent. Gerald often felt guilty about his financial dependence on her. "I hate that you have to do all this for me," he confessed one evening as they sat under the old baobab tree near his apartment. "I want to be able to take care of you one day." "You will," Wendy assured him, squeezing his hand. "Success doesn't happen overnight. We'll get there together." Their bond grew stronger with each shared hardship. Wendy became a silent partner in Gerald's journey, networking with people who could offer him opportunities. She organized a showcase where industry insiders attended, hoping it would be his big break. Unfortunately, the event didn't yield the results they had hoped for. Gerald was rejected yet again, and he spiraled into self-doubt. "Maybe they're right," he muttered bitterly. "Maybe I'm not good enough." "Don't say that," Wendy urged. "You have something special. They just don't see it yet, but I do, and one day everyone else will too." It was moments like these that kept Gerald going. He credited Wendy with saving him from giving up on his dreams entirely. However, the sacrifices Wendy made didn't go unnoticed by those around her. Her parents continued to warn her about the risks of investing too much in a man with no security. Her friends began distancing themselves, tired of repeating the same advice. As the years stretched on, Wendy remained steadfast in her belief that Gerald would one day achieve greatness. Yet she couldn't deny the growing ache inside her. She wanted more than promises of someday. She wanted a future where they could finally build a life together without the shadow of uncertainty looming over them. For now, though, she buried those feelings, choosing to stand by the man she loved. Wendy had no idea that the journey she was on would soon test her faith, her loyalty, and her very identity in ways she could never have imagined. 4 years had passed since Wendy Adekunle and Gerald Brown began their journey together. Life was not easy for either of them, but Wendy remained a beacon of hope in Gerald's darkest moments. His music career seemed stuck in an endless cycle of rejection and disappointment. Record labels constantly brushed him off with vague promises of getting back to him. Still, Wendy continued to encourage him, believing that success was only a matter of time and persistence. Gerald's days often started and ended in frustration. He would spend hours perfecting his music, pouring his soul into lyrics that spoke of pain, hope, and triumph. Yet it never seemed to be enough. One rainy afternoon in the heart of Dawson City, he returned from yet another failed meeting with a record executive. His face was tight with anger as he threw his guitar onto the floor of his cramped apartment. "Why do I even bother anymore?" he muttered, pacing the room. "I'm wasting my life chasing a dream that'll never come true." Wendy was there as always. She quietly picked up the guitar and set it aside. "Gerald, you've come too far to give up now," she said softly. "Every great artist faces this kind of struggle before their breakthrough. You just need to keep pushing." He let out a bitter laugh. "Easy for you to say. You have a stable job. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day feeling like a failure." Her heart ached at his words. She knew how much he carried on his shoulders, his family's disapproval, the pressure to succeed, the fear of being forgotten. "You're not a failure," she whispered, stepping closer. "You have talent. You have me. We'll get through this together." Her words always had a calming effect on him. He sighed and pulled her into an embrace. "I don't deserve you, Wendy," he murmured. "You're the only thing keeping me sane." But even Wendy's support wasn't enough to silence the doubts gnawing at Gerald's mind. As the months dragged on, he began to distance himself from her emotionally. He stopped sharing his fears and frustrations, retreating into his music instead. Wendy noticed the shift but chose not to confront him. She worried that pushing him too hard might break him completely. The strain of their situation began to take its toll on her as well. At work, her performance started slipping. She missed deadlines and zoned out during meetings, her thoughts consumed by Gerald's struggles. Her boss, Mrs. Otunba, called her in for a meeting one afternoon. "Wendy, is everything all right?" Mrs. Otunba asked, her voice laced with concern. "You've been distracted lately. This isn't like you." Wendy hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I've just been dealing with some personal issues," she finally admitted. "But I'll get back on track, I promise." Mrs. Otomba gave her a sympathetic nod. "Take care of yourself, Wendy. You're one of our best employees, but you can't pour from an empty cup." Those words lingered in Wendy's mind long after the meeting ended. She realized she had been neglecting her own well-being in her quest to support Gerald. Yet even with that realization, she couldn't bring herself to prioritize her needs. She loved Gerald too much to abandon him in his time of need. Her friends, however, were growing increasingly frustrated with her choices. Brenda, who had been Wendy's closest friend since secondary school, confronted her during a girls' night out at a cafe in Lakeside. "Wendy, how long are you going to keep sacrificing yourself for this guy?" Brenda demanded. "You've given him years of your life, and what do you have to show for it?" Wendy stirred her coffee, avoiding Brenda's gaze. "It's not like that. Gerald's going through a rough patch. I can't just walk away when he needs me." Brenda leaned forward, her expression serious. "I get that you care about him, but at some point you have to care about yourself too. You can't keep waiting for him to get his act together. What if he never does?" The question hit Wendy harder than she expected. She had asked herself the same thing in moments of doubt, but she always silenced those thoughts with hope. "He will," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know he will." The conversation ended in uneasy silence. Wendy couldn't shake the feeling that her friends were losing faith in her, just as Gerald was losing faith in himself. The isolation weighed heavily on her, but she remained resolute. She had made a choice to stand by Gerald, and she intended to see it through. Late one night, as she lay awake in bed, Wendy's mind wandered back to the early days of their relationship. She remembered the nights spent dreaming about their future, the house they would buy, the children they would raise, the music that would one day bring them both joy and security. Those dreams felt distant now, like whispers from another life. Still, Wendy refused to give up. She believed in Gerald's potential with every fiber of her being. She believed that love, patience, and perseverance would eventually be rewarded. But deep down, a small voice of doubt whispered that the road ahead might be far more treacherous than she had ever imagined. The morning began like any other, with Gerald Brown pacing his tiny apartment in Egba Heights, nervously awaiting a call. He had submitted a demo to a major record label weeks earlier, but he was too familiar with the agonizing wait that followed. Wendy Adekunle had left early for work, but not without first leaving a note of encouragement on his table. It read, "Your time is coming, stay ready." He held the note tightly, feeling a flicker of hope in his chest. Gerald had heard countless rejections over the years, yet Wendy's unwavering belief in him had kept him going. Just as he began to lose himself in thought, his phone rang. His hands shook as he picked it up. It was Mr. Jones, a well-known producer with Royal Gate Records. "Hello, is this Gerald Brown?" The man's voice came through the receiver. "Yes, it is," Gerald stammered, his heart pounding. "Well, I listened to your demo. You've got potential, Gerald. We want to meet with you to discuss a deal." For a moment, Gerald couldn't speak. He thought he might have misheard. After years of dead-end opportunities and broken promises, was this finally the moment he had been waiting for? "Thank you, sir. I'll be there," he finally managed to say. The call ended, leaving him in stunned silence. Slowly, a grin spread across his face. He let out a loud whoop and punched the air. His neighbors banged on the walls in annoyance, but Gerald didn't care. He immediately called Wendy. "Wendy, guess what? They want to sign me," he exclaimed as soon as she picked up. Wendy gasped. "Oh my God, Gerald. I knew it. I'm so proud of you." Hearing the excitement in her voice filled Gerald with a sense of triumph. This was their victory, a culmination of years of sacrifice and perseverance. They made plans to celebrate that night, but for now, Gerald had a meeting to attend. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. Gerald was officially signed to Royal Gate Records. They provided him with a team to produce his first album, and he was soon traveling between Dawson City and Royal View Studios for recording sessions. His songs began gaining traction on local radio stations, and it wasn't long before his name became known across the country. Wendy couldn't have been happier for him. She attended his first major performance at the Zenith Arena, where thousands of fans screamed his name. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched him command the stage with a confidence she had never seen before. In that moment, she believed all their hardships had been worth it. However, with success came new challenges Wendy was not prepared for. Gerald's schedule became increasingly demanding. Days would pass without a word from him. When they did speak, he often sounded distracted or exhausted. Wendy tried to be understanding, knowing how much pressure he was under, but the distance between them grew nonetheless. Things worsened when Gerald began attracting the attention of women eager to be associated with his rising fame. At first, Wendy dismissed the flirtations as harmless. She trusted Gerald. He loved her, he had said so countless times. But doubt began to creep in when she overheard a conversation between two of his backup singers after a performance. "Gerald is something else," one of them giggled. "He's got women practically throwing themselves at him." "Yeah, I heard he's been hanging out with that actress from Royal Hills," the other replied. Wendy's stomach twisted. She tried to brush it off as gossip, but the seed of insecurity had been planted. She confronted Gerald about it one evening when they finally had time to talk. "Gerald, I know you're under a lot of pressure, but I need to know, are you being honest with me?" she asked carefully. Gerald sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Wendy, you're overthinking things. People will always talk. You're the one I love. You know that. His reassurance eased her fears for a while, but cracks in their relationship continued to form. Gerald became more secretive, often brushing off her concerns with vague excuses. Meanwhile, Wendy faced mounting pressure from her family and friends who warned her that fame could change a man. You've done enough for him, Brenda said bluntly during another tense conversation. Don't let him take you for granted now that he's successful. I'm not giving up on him, Wendy replied, her voice firm. We've come too far for that. But deep inside, Wendy began to question whether her loyalty would be enough to withstand the storm brewing around them. The man who had once clung to her for support now seemed out of reach. Gerald's world was expanding rapidly, and she feared she might be left behind. Yet she held on to hope. She reminded herself that they had built this dream together. Surely Gerald wouldn't abandon the woman who had stood by him through years of struggle, would he? The question haunted her as the weight of uncertainty pressed down like a shadow on the horizon. The dream they had shared was no longer a simple promise. It had become a complex reality, and Wendy's place in it was becoming increasingly unclear. Wendy could sense that something was wrong long before the news broke. Gerald had been acting strangely for weeks, short-tempered, evasive, and constantly glued to his phone. Their once lengthy conversations became brief exchanges marked by irritation on his part. At first, Wendy attributed it to the pressure of fame, convincing herself that the demands of his career were overwhelming him. But deep down, a nagging voice whispered that there was more to it than he let on. One rainy evening in Amora district, Wendy sat in her apartment, scrolling through her phone absent-mindedly. She was growing accustomed to spending nights alone, despite Gerald's promises that things would slow down. As she checked the entertainment blog The Star Buzz, her heart froze when she saw a headline that read, "Music star Gerald Brown allegedly expecting a baby with socialite Amara Fox." Her mind raced as she read the article in disbelief. According to the report, Amara, a well-known figure in the city's social scene, had confirmed that she was carrying Gerald's child. Wendy stared at the screen, her hands trembling. She refused to believe it. Surely there was some mistake. Gerald wouldn't betray her. Not after everything they had been through together. Without wasting a moment, Wendy dialed Gerald's number. It rang for what felt like an eternity before he finally answered. "Hey," he said, his voice unusually flat. "Gerald, what's going on? I just saw an article saying that you got someone pregnant." "Tell me it's not true," Wendy demanded, her voice shaking. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy sigh. "Wendy, listen, it's complicated. I was going to tell you, but things got out of hand." The words hit her like a punch to the stomach. "You were going to tell me? So it's true?" "Yes," he admitted quietly, "but it wasn't what you think. I made a mistake. Amara came on to me, and I wasn't thinking straight. It just happened." "It just happened," Wendy echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. "Gerald, how could you do this to me? After everything we've been through." "I'm sorry," he pleaded. "I swear it meant nothing. I love you, Wendy. You're the one I want to be with." But his words offered little comfort. The trust she had in him was shattered. Wendy felt like the ground beneath her had crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to comprehend the betrayal. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered. "Please, Wendy," Gerald begged. "Don't let this ruin us. I'll make it right. I promise." Despite her anger and heartbreak, Wendy found herself wavering. The thought of walking away from the man she had sacrificed so much for was unbearable. She had built her life around him, and the idea of starting over was terrifying. Against the advice of her instincts, she agreed to meet with him to discuss the situation. That weekend they met at a secluded cafe in Bremer Park. Gerald looked tired and remorseful, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous tension. He reached for her hand, but Wendy pulled away. "I need you to explain to me how this happened," she said, her tone cold and detached. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "Amara was persistent. We were at a party, and I had too much to drink. I wasn't thinking clearly. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean anything. I swear." Wendy studied his face, searching for any sign of the man she had once known. He looked sincere, but the damage had been done. Do you have any idea how humiliated I feel? People are talking about this everywhere. My parents, my friends, they're all telling me to leave you. I know I messed up, he said, his voice cracking. But I can't lose you, Wendy. You've always been the one who believed in me. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Against her better judgment, Wendy allowed herself to believe him. She told herself that everyone made mistakes and that love was about forgiveness. But deep down, a part of her remained wounded and weary. Over the following weeks, Gerald made an effort to repair their relationship. He showered Wendy with apologies and gestures of affection, hoping to rebuild the trust he had broken. For a while, it seemed like things were improving. Wendy wanted to believe that they could move past this. Yet the cracks in their foundation were becoming harder to ignore. The whispers and rumors didn't stop. At work, her colleagues gave her pitying looks. Brenda, who had always been blunt, pulled her aside one afternoon. "Wendy, I'm saying this because I care about you," Brenda began. "You deserve better than this. Gerald doesn't respect you. If he did, he wouldn't have put you in this position." "I know you mean well," Wendy replied, her voice weary. "But this is my decision. I'm not ready to walk away." Brenda shook her head in frustration. "Just don't lose yourself in trying to save him. You're worth more than that." The words lingered in Wendy's mind long after their conversation ended. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at a crossroads, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. For now, she chose loyalty, hoping, praying that Gerald would prove her faith in him was not misplaced. But the storm that had begun to brew showed no signs of abating. The atmosphere between Wendy and Gerald remained tense and uncertain, despite his repeated promises to change. Wendy tried to mask her insecurities, but every time she went online or heard a passing comment, rumor about Gerald's infidelity seemed to resurface. Though she had forgiven him once, the wound of betrayal had not fully healed. The distance between them grew wider as Gerald became increasingly absorbed in his fame. His career was flourishing beyond anyone's expectations. He was invited to high-profile events, award shows, and international tours. His face was plastered on billboards around Amora district, and his music dominated the airwaves. Wendy watched as the man she had once comforted in his darkest moments was now idolized by millions. One evening, Wendy decided to surprise him after one of his performances at the Emerald Dome, a popular concert venue in Rivercrest City. She had noticed how hard it was to catch him on the phone lately, and their schedules never seemed to align. She hoped that by showing up in person, they could reconnect. Clutching a bouquet of flowers, she made her way backstage after the show. The scene that greeted her was nothing short of chaos. Fans and groupies crowded the hallway, hoping to catch a glimpse of Gerald. Security guards struggled to control the throng of people, while members of his team barked orders to clear the area. Wendy felt out of place in the midst of the noise and flashing cameras. "Excuse me," she said to a guard. "I'm here to see Gerald Brown." The guard gave her a skeptical look. "And who are you?" "I'm his girlfriend," Wendy replied hesitantly. The guard didn't seem convinced, but eventually radioed someone on the team to confirm. After what felt like an eternity, a young woman dressed in a sleek black outfit appeared and escorted Wendy to Gerald's dressing room. As she entered, she heard laughter, soft and intimate. Her stomach clenched. Inside, Gerald was seated on a couch with a stunning woman draped over his shoulder. They were laughing about something she couldn't hear. For a moment, Gerald didn't notice Wendy standing in the doorway. When he finally looked up and saw her, his expression froze. "Wendy," he muttered, standing up quickly and pulling away from the woman. Wendy's eyes darted between them. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice colder than she intended. "No, of course not," Gerald said hastily. He turned to the woman. "Can you give us a minute?" The woman smirked and sauntered out of the room without a word. Wendy folded her arms across her chest, trying to steady her emotions. "So this is what your life looks like now?" "It's not what it looks like," Gerald said, running a hand through his hair. "She's just a fan. Nothing happened." "Fans don't usually get cozy in your dressing room," Wendy shot back. "How many more secrets are you hiding from me, Gerald?" His shoulders sagged, and for a brief moment she saw the guilt in his eyes. Wendy, I'm trying, I really am, but this fame thing, it's overwhelming. Everywhere I turn, there's temptation. I don't know how to handle it sometimes. Handle it, she echoed bitterly. You're making excuses again. You can't keep using fame as a reason to hurt me. I stood by you when no one else believed in you. I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay me. I know, he whispered, his voice barely audible. You have every right to be angry, but I don't want to lose you. I'll do better, I promise. Wendy shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. Promises don't mean much anymore, Gerald. I need actions, not words. The conversation left both of them emotionally drained. Wendy left the venue that night feeling more uncertain than ever. She wanted to believe that Gerald could change, but trust was a fragile thing, and his repeated betrayals had left deep scars. Over the following weeks, things did not improve. Wendy threw herself into her work, trying to distract herself from the turmoil in her relationship. Meanwhile, Gerald continued living in the public eye, constantly surrounded by adoring fans and opportunistic influencers. Gossip columns ran stories about him almost daily, linking him to various women. Wendy stopped reading them altogether, fearing the emotional toll they would take. The final blow came one afternoon when Wendy received an anonymous message on social media. It contained screenshots of a conversation between Gerald and another woman, a woman who claimed to be pregnant with his child. At first, Wendy thought it was a cruel prank, but as she read through the messages, a nauseating sense of déjà vu washed over her. She confronted Gerald that evening. This time he didn't deny it. It's true, he admitted quietly. She's saying she's pregnant. I don't even remember how it happened. I was drunk again, Wendy cried, her voice breaking. How many times are you going to make the same mistake? How many women, Gerald? How many lies? He didn't have an answer. Wendy's world collapsed around her as the reality of his betrayal sunk in. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern. A part of her had held on to the hope that he would change, but now that hope was shattered beyond repair. The silence between them stretched painfully long. Wendy wiped her tears and took a deep breath. I can't keep doing this, she whispered. You've broken me, Gerald. She turned and walked away, not knowing if she would ever have the strength to face him again. The man she had loved for nearly a decade was now a stranger who had stolen her dreams and left her drowning in heartache. Wendy sat in her apartment, still reeling from the news of Gerald's latest affair. This time there was no gossip or anonymous messages, it was undeniable. The other woman had gone public, confirming that she was pregnant with Gerald's child. Wendy's heart was a battlefield of pain and confusion. She didn't know how much more she could endure. Her phone buzzed. It was Gerald. She hesitated for a moment before answering. Wendy, his voice came through the line, calm but distant. We need to talk. Can you meet me at Haven Point Cafe tomorrow afternoon? Wendy felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was his way of apologizing and promising to change. She agreed to meet, desperately clinging to the belief that they could still fix things. The next day she arrived at the cafe early, nervously tapping her fingers on the table as she waited. When Gerald finally walked in, she noticed something different about him. His usually warm smile was absent, replaced by a blank, almost cold expression. He sat across from her, his hands fidgeting on the table. Thanks for coming, he said quietly. Wendy leaned forward, her eyes searching his face for some sign of warmth. What's going on, Gerald? Why do I feel like you're shutting me out? He hesitated, avoiding her gaze. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. Her stomach sank. Okay, and what have you been thinking? Gerald took a deep breath. I don't think we should be together anymore. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. Wendy froze, her mind refusing to process what she had just heard. What? You don't think we should be together? Gerald, where is this coming from? I've made too many mistakes, he said, his voice low. I keep hurting you, and I don't want to keep doing that. Maybe it's better if we go our separate ways. No, Wendy shook her head furiously. You don't get to make this decision. You don't get to throw me away after everything I've done for you. It's not like that, Gerald insisted. I'm trying to protect you. You deserve better." "Stop!" she cut him off, tears streaming down her face. "Don't you dare tell me what I deserve. I stood by you when you had nothing. I sacrificed everything for you. And now that you've made it, you think you can just walk away?" He looked down at his hands, guilt etched into his features, but he didn't take back his words. "Wendy, I'm sorry, I really am. But I can't keep dragging you into my mess. This is for the best." "For the best?" Wendy repeated, her voice breaking. "How can you say that? I love you, Gerald. I've loved you through everything. Please, don't do this." She reached across the table to grab his hand, but he pulled away. The rejection felt like a knife to her heart. "Please, Gerald," she begged, her voice cracking. "Don't throw away everything we've built. We can fix this. I'll forgive you. We can get through it together." But Gerald shook his head. "I don't think I can change, Wendy. I've hurt you too much already. You'll only get hurt again if we keep this going." Wendy sobbed openly, not caring who might be watching. She pleaded with him over and over, her pride shattered. "Please, please don't do this. I don't know how to live without you." "I'm sorry," Gerald whispered, standing up from the table. "Goodbye, Wendy." And just like that, he walked away, leaving her broken in a way she had never thought possible. She sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, her tears falling onto the table. The man she had devoted nearly a decade of her life to had abandoned her. When she finally forced herself to leave the cafe, her legs felt like lead. The world outside seemed colder, harsher. She made her way home in a daze, barely registering the streets and people around her. Once inside her apartment, she collapsed on the floor, crying until she could no longer breathe. She felt like a hollow shell. Every dream, every plan for the future had been ripped away. For the next few days, Wendy locked herself in her room. She didn't answer calls or texts, ignoring Brenda and even her parents. She couldn't bear the thought of hearing "I told you so" from anyone. She felt like a failure, ashamed that she had begged a man to stay who had so cruelly discarded her. Finally, her parents intervened. Her father, Chief Adekunle, arrived at her apartment and banged on the door until she let him in. "Wendy, enough of this," he said sternly. "You're coming home. We'll help you get through this, but you can't keep hiding in here." Her mother hugged her tightly as soon as she saw her. "We've got you, baby. You'll be okay." With their support, Wendy returned to their family home in Ridgefield. She spent her days in a haze of grief, replaying every moment of her relationship with Gerald. She blamed herself for not leaving sooner, for holding on to a man who had never truly valued her. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, a quiet anger began to build inside her. Gerald had taken so much from her, her time, her trust, her dreams. But she refused to let him take her dignity. She would find a way to reclaim her life, no matter how long it took. Wendy had been broken, but she was not defeated. Wendy slowly adjusted to life back at her parents' home in Ridgefield. Each day felt like a battle as she tried to rebuild herself from the emotional wreckage Gerald had left behind. The silence of her room offered no comfort. Instead, it amplified her thoughts, forcing her to relive the pain of his betrayal and the humiliation of begging him to stay. Nights were the worst, filled with restless tossing and vivid nightmares of him walking away over and over again. Her parents and Brenda made every effort to support her. Her father took her on walks around the neighborhood, gently encouraging her to talk about anything other than Gerald. Her mother would cook her favorite meals, urging her to eat even when she had no appetite. Slowly, these small acts of kindness began to break through the numbness that had enveloped Wendy. One evening, Brenda dragged her out of the house to attend a small gathering at a friend's place. Wendy resisted at first, but Brenda wouldn't take no for an answer. "You need to remember what life feels like outside of that room," Brenda said firmly. "Come on, it's just a few people. You don't even have to stay long." Reluctantly, Wendy agreed. The gathering was held at a quiet villa on the outskirts of town. Soft music played in the background, and the atmosphere was relaxed. Wendy felt awkward and out of place at first, but as the evening progressed, she found herself laughing at some of the light-hearted conversations. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of normalcy. "See, it's not so bad," Brenda teased, nudging her playfully. Wendy smiled faintly. "You were right, I needed this." However, the reprieve was short-lived. The next morning, Wendy was scrolling through social media when she stumbled upon new gossip about Gerald. A tabloid site had posted pictures of him at a lavish party, surrounded by women and flashing his signature smile. The headline read, "Gerald Brown living his best life post-breakup." The sight of him looking so carefree while she was still struggling to pick up the pieces sent a wave of anger through her. How dare he move on so easily? Did their years together mean so little to him? Wendy's hand trembled as she closed the app. The rage she felt wasn't just about the breakup. It was about everything he had put her through. She had been there for him at his lowest, sacrificing her time, dreams, and even her dignity, only for him to throw her away like she was nothing. She couldn't let him get away with it. Not this time. Determined, Wendy would reflect on all the things she knew about Gerald, things he had worked hard to keep out of the public eye. Over the years, she had overheard conversations about his drug use and his volatile temper with staff members. Gerald's polished public persona was a facade, and Wendy knew that the truth could easily shatter his image. That evening, she called Brenda to share her thoughts. "I'm tired of being the one who gets hurt while he lives without consequences," Wendy said, her voice resolute. "I need to expose who he really is." Brenda hesitated. "Are you sure about this? I mean, you have every right to be angry, but once you do this, there's no going back." "I know," Wendy replied firmly, "but he's ruined enough of my life. It's time he faces the truth about himself." With Brenda's help, Wendy began gathering evidence. She reached out to a few of Gerald's former employees, many of whom had stories of his abusive behavior and unprofessionalism. Some spoke of how he showed up to work high on drugs, while others recounted how he verbally assaulted them over minor mistakes. Wendy documented everything, ensuring that she had credible sources to back up her claims. In the process, Wendy uncovered even more unsettling details. Gerald had been using illegal substances at parties, and there were rumors of him bribing authorities to keep these incidents under wraps. The more she learned, the more determined she became to bring his secrets to light. One night, as Wendy organized the evidence, she paused to reflect on how much she had changed. The woman who had once quietly endured pain and betrayal was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who had finally found her voice. The next step was to contact a journalist she trusted. Wendy chose Nina Okafor, a respected investigative reporter known for exposing high-profile figures. Nina was intrigued by Wendy's story and agreed to meet in person to review the evidence. "You're doing the right thing," Nina assured her after their meeting. "People need to know the truth. Men like Gerald rely on their power and status to hide their misdeeds." For the first time in weeks, Wendy felt a sense of control over her life. She wasn't just a victim anymore, she was taking back her narrative. As the publication date for the expose approached, Wendy braced herself for the fallout. She knew that once the truth was out, there would be backlash, but she no longer cared about the opinions of strangers or even Gerald's fans. This was about reclaiming her dignity and holding him accountable. The storm was coming, and Wendy was ready. For the first time since their breakup, she felt a sense of peace. She had spent years building Gerald up, but now she would show the world the man behind the mask. The day the expose was published, Wendy woke up to a flood of messages on her phone. Headlines across major news platforms were all focused on one story: "Behind the Music, Gerald Brown's Dark Truths Revealed." The article, authored by Nina Okafor, painted a damning portrait of Gerald's reckless behavior, his drug use, mistreatment of employees, and multiple scandals that had been quietly hidden under the rug. The public was shocked. Within hours, social media exploded with reactions. Fans who once idolized Gerald expressed disappointment and outrage. His sponsors swiftly announced that they were terminating their contracts with him. Royal Gate Records released a statement distancing themselves from his actions, and several high-profile collaborations were cancelled. Wendy watched the fallout unfold with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She hadn't expected things to escalate so quickly. Messages from Brenda and other friends poured in, congratulating her for finally standing up for herself. Her parents, who had initially been concerned about the risks of going public, were quietly proud of her strength. Sometimes justice comes when you least expect it, her father said that evening, patting her on the shoulder. Despite the public uproar, Wendy couldn't shake the lingering weight of everything she had endured. The scars from her relationship with Gerald hadn't disappeared overnight. She spent hours reflecting on how deeply she had lost herself in trying to support someone else's dreams. For years she had made excuses for his behavior, believing that love and loyalty would eventually be rewarded. But now she knew better. Meanwhile, Gerald's world was collapsing. He tried to contain the damage by releasing a public apology, but the words felt hollow to those who had followed his rise to fame. His fans were not in a forgiving mood, and the media continued to dig into his past scandals. His team of advisors slowly abandoned him one by one, leaving him isolated. A week after the story broke, Gerald attempted to reach out to Wendy. He called her repeatedly, but she ignored every attempt. Then one evening, he showed up unannounced at her family's home in Ridgefield. Wendy was stunned when she opened the door and saw him standing there, looking disheveled and broken. "Wendy, please, I need to talk to you," he said softly. She hesitated, unsure whether she wanted to hear anything he had to say. But a part of her was curious. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "What do you want, Gerald?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness," he began, his voice trembling. "But I needed to see you. Everything's falling apart, and I can't stop thinking about how badly I hurt you." Wendy stared at him, her emotions conflicted. The man standing before her was a shadow of the confident star she had once loved. He seemed genuinely remorseful, but she wasn't sure if it was because he had lost her or because he had lost his career. "You're only here because your life is in ruins," she said coldly. "Where was this remorse when I begged you to take me back? You didn't care then." "I did care," he insisted. "I was scared of how much I was hurting you and scared of myself. I thought pushing you away would protect you." Wendy laughed bitterly. "Protect me? You didn't protect me, Gerald. You destroyed me. And now that you're finally facing the consequences of your actions, you want me to save you?" "I don't expect you to save me," he said quietly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." Wendy sighed deeply, feeling a mixture of anger and pity. Part of her had waited for this moment, for him to acknowledge the pain he had caused. But now that it was here, she realized she didn't need his apology to heal. "I appreciate the apology," she said after a long pause. "But it doesn't change what happened. I've moved on, Gerald. You need to figure out your own life without me." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand. I wish I had been a better man for you." Without another word, Wendy turned and walked back inside, closing the door on that chapter of her life. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of closure. Gerald no longer had power over her. She had reclaimed her identity and her strength. In the weeks that followed, Wendy focused on rebuilding herself. She enrolled in a professional development program, something she had always wanted to do, but had postponed for Gerald's sake. She reconnected with friends and began exploring new hobbies, finding joy in small moments of peace and growth. Brenda remained a constant presence in her life, cheering her on every step of the way. "I knew you'd rise from the ashes like a phoenix," Brenda joked one evening. "You're unstoppable now." Wendy smiled, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. "I've learned that no one else can define my worth. I had to fight for myself." As time passed, the pain of the past began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of resilience. Wendy knew there would still be challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid. She had endured heartbreak and betrayal, but she had emerged stronger. This was her story now, and she was determined to write the next chapter on her own terms. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.